Welcome to PhD with Woman on It, Hack the Future. My name is Beata Young, and today's PhD Positivity Hack delivered will be by our guest, Debbie Ausburn. Topic: Secrets of Step Parenting and Blended Family Success. Episode 146 starts here. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring heart to that hustle, because empathy is my mojo, and empathy is critical when you are step parenting and live in a blended family. First, let me mention what's been happening in the world of technology and our community. Best of luck to Hype CEO and founder Christina Newton at the Black Girls Dream Conference on June 7th to 11th in Atlanta. We wish you all the best. A round of applause to our former PhD guest, Rosa Armesto-Plaha, on her appointment as the new Director General of FESE. We are thrilled about your success. And finally, congratulations to our former PhD guest, Naila Beth Cowell. We are excited to see you thrive in your new role as the Executive Committee of the Founders Auxiliary Board supporting Children's National Hospital. Now let's go back to our topic: secrets of step parenting and blended family success. So, how to deal with foster and step parenting? In this PhD, join us with the compassionate advocate and mentor in the world of foster and step parenting, Debbie Ausburn. Debbie has a background in social work and nurtured a blended family of 7 children and 10 grandchildren, drawing wisdom from their journey together. As a sought-after speaker and author of Raising Other People's Children, Debbie shares practical insights on building resilience, fostering positive relationships with biological parents, and navigating the unique dynamics of blended families. Through her blog, RaisingOtherPeoplesChildren.blog, she continues to inspire and empower others on their parenting journey. Debbie, let's start with a simple question. Where are you joining us from today?
I am coming from a suburb of Atlanta. And so, of course, your mention of the blogging conference caught my ear. I'm going to definitely have to check that one out.
Excellent. So, since we are diving into the world of blended families, you're in Atlanta. Were you always living there? Is that your hometown and that's where you raised your family?
Well, a couple of hours north of Atlanta is where I grew up as a child, and then my job took me a couple of hours away to another state, Asheville, North Carolina. If anyone has heard, it's in the Blue Ridge Mountains, lovely, lovely touristy area up there. And I started my journey as a foster parent there, and then job changes and family changes. My brother and sister were raising children without my advice, and my mom had a stroke. So it was time to come back home, and I landed in Atlanta, which is close to where I grew up. And that's where I met and married a man with 2 kids left at home, 5 children total, and started my journey as a step parent.
Well, let's get things straight here. We are sitting on the couch here, and a little bit of real talk, as I can hear. Your sister and brother didn't take advice, but it didn't lead to your mother having a stroke, right?
No, that's right. I'm sorry. Those things were very separate.
These things happen to the best of us, but since we are talking about problems and not just health related, but maybe more kind of how to call it, maybe wholesome related, because really the family's health, and I mean as a core, as a institution, is vitally important. How to keep this blended family, how to do this preparatory step when you move into the family of already existing organism.
Well, that's one of the important things we have to understand. I always start with it took me a while to understand this, but I learned I had to understand that from my kids' perspective, I was not the person who was supposed to be there. They wanted their biological family in their lives. And no matter how nice I am, no matter how wonderful I am, no matter how much they love me, I am not the biological parent. And there's a strong sense from them, almost primal in origin with these kids, that I'm not the person who's supposed to be in their lives. And I had to understand that sense and recognize I'm not the person who's supposed to be there. I never will be, and that's okay. I can develop a strong relationship with them in spite of that. And so once I understood my lane, as it were, then I was able to work on developing the relationships that could be developed.
Well, it sounded like it took you a while to understand that line.
It did, because when I first started out as a foster parent, I went in with these rose-colored glasses that I was going to be wonderful. Kids were going to accept me. We were going to start this whole new family with them, and they would be thrilled to have the substitute, and everything would be rosy, like the end of all of the movies that we've seen. But reality is very, very different. These kids resist having any substitutes. They are very tied to their biological family. And took me a while to recognize that while I couldn't have the relationship that I thought we were going to be having, that being their plan B parent could be pretty wonderful in its own way.
Mm. Plan B parent, that's a beautiful way to put it, Debbie. However, I wanted to ask you, right from the get-go, you moved into the house of your husband or future husband, and how did you approach that plan, or how did you plan to be? Were you planning to be a friend, or just a quiet observer?
Well, I think we can understand, we can take instruction from fairy tales. We as people, we are storytelling animals. We all have our stories, and everyone is the hero of their own story. And so when I'm moving into a new family or moving into a new child's life, I'm moving into their story. And if you look at all of the fairy tales, there's only two roles for us. We can be either the mentors or we can be the villains. Every story has a hero. That role is taken in our kids' story. And and they will let us be either the mentor or the villain. And our job is to move ourselves into the mentor role, because the parent role is already taken. So we need to be one of the wise, loving, caring mentors that everyone needs in their life.
Mm. Well, if the kid doesn't want a mentor, what would be your advice? Because quite often they don't. They just do
No,
not accept you, whatever you do.
right. Every story has to have a villain. And sometimes we are that villain, because the kids won't, no matter how much we think they should, they will not cast their biological parents as the villain. Well, 99% of the time they will not. And since every story has to have a villain, that leaves, sometimes they insist that we are the villain, or that we represent the villain, or that somehow we're blamed for everything that happens. And my advice in those roles is to just keep being who you are. Understand that caring and commitment, particularly for children, is a one-way street. And we can't expect them to react like adults. We can't expect them to set up an equal relationship that you would expect in a healthy adult relationship. Working with kids and parenting kids it's one way. We are always giving, and we have to do that without expectations of anything in return. And we certainly can't expect them to be grateful for us. Even if we could expect it, gratitude's a very rich diet, and it's too rich for a healthy relationship. So we have to let them be who they are and accept and love them anyway. Now, along with that comes healthy boundaries. You have to insist on respect, and if they don't give it to you, then my advice is you don't react, you don't push back, you just find ways to withdraw from the situation. I remember I had one of my grandchildren moved in, and long story, my son and his daughter moved back into our house, and I ended up being responsible for getting her to school every morning because of my son's work schedule. And there were days that she was just really obnoxious because she didn't want to be there. She wanted to be back with her intact biological family. She especially didn't want to go to school, and I was the villain because I was the one insisting that she go to school. And I learned to just not react, be very patient. But then when she would come to me for something she wanted, not something she needed, but something she wanted, I would say, remember yesterday when I told you I don't do favors for people who were rude to me? You were rude to me yesterday. So until we talk about that and work it through, the answer is no. And that was just a boundary I set with her. Every time she was rude to me, I would just say, remember, next time you want something from me, my answer will be, I don't do nice things for rude people. And by setting that boundary, but still being there and caring about her, we were able to work through those periods and establish a strong relationship. But you have to have that part of, or that double barrel of saying, I care about you, I love you, I'm here for you, and here are the boundaries of what I will accept and what I will not.
Right. It's difficult to be a parent, biological parent. It's more difficult to step into these shoes that are unmatchable. It's almost like
Right.
marrying into the, a wife that was deceased
Yes.
scenario. But since you're using beautiful analogy of a road system, caring and commitment is a one-way street. I would also add that it's a slow moving street.
Yes. Yes.
No more
Yes.
than 20 kilometers an hour. You just have
That's
to
right.
keep going. Now,
It's very
gratitude.
crowdy and very muddy.
Oh, very indeed. It's almost like favela somewhere in Brazil. Now
Right.
you have to come with heavy guns of patience. And now, I love that analogy. So Debbie, let's look at some facts because I brought some facts here just to give some background into blended families. These are quite common, especially in America. Estimates suggest around 40% of families in the US are blended, meaning at least one partner has a child from a previous relationship. A source is love to know. While the exact numbers may vary depending on the source, the growth of blended families seem to have plateaued in recent decades. Children in blended families, around 16% of children live in blended families, according to US Bureau of Census. This translates to a significant portion of the younger generation experiencing this family structure. Now, Debbie, you made it your career choice to work with blended families. Your book about raising other people's children is a quite inspirational book. Why did you choose this path? What inspired you?
Well, a lot of it was because my parents raised us working with what we then called at-risk kids, which was kids from dysfunctional or broken families. So I was very comfortable working with those folks. And then when I embarked on my career, and it was just me and as a single person and my dogs, and I didn't see any relationships on the horizon. I wanted something in my life to be a part of other than just my job. As much as I loved my job, and as much as I have enjoyed being a lawyer and have enjoyed my career, I wanted additional. I wanted to do something in addition to that. So the ministry, the mission that fit my circumstances and my skill sets at that time was to invest one-on-one in a child's life. And having been a social worker, I knew how desperate the need was for skilled foster parents, or at least foster parents who wouldn't freak out about particular issues. And so I just gravitated in that direction. And I got my feet wet a little bit at a time. I worked as a emergency foster care, which was short-term foster parenting. Then when I moved to another job, I worked as a respite care. They paired me up with another foster family, and the kids stayed with me on the weekends. And then that same agency, as they got to know me, we gradually moved into um, uh, long-term care with older teens who were self-sufficient, because my job took me out of town and with long hours. So I needed to be paired with a foster child who could take care of themselves and not blow up the house if I didn't get home till 7 o'clock at night.
Mm. Great, great story, great path. Now we have a couple of questions. Thank you so much for great questions. We have Olga Vasina, who, as always, is joining us in the show and asking. You mentioned finding your lane, Debbie. Is there a time when you have to switch lanes, and how do you do that?
Not really. The story I like to tell is, at one point after my marriage, my husband's ex-wife filed for custody of the two youngest kids. Actually, the one youngest kid. He was the only one who was far enough away from 18, which is the age in the states of adulthood. So we were talking to him, and he was not going to give us an answer, because he did not want to be seen as picking sides between his mom and his dad. And we didn't want him to pick sides. We just didn't want to spend a lot of resources on an outcome if he hated it. And so my husband asked him, well, if you had a magic wand, how would your life be different? And he didn't hesitate. He said, well, if I had a magic wand, you and mom would still be together. And then there was this pause, and he looked over at me very concerned and said, well, no insult, Debbie. You and the dogs would be living right next door if I had a magic wand. And this child and I had bonded. We were very close. We got along really well. And I was, in all essence, except for um, visitation every other weekend, I was the mother figure. But I understood that from his perspective, I was not supposed to be there, and my lane was as the step parent. So in that sense, you don't really ever get to switch lanes, no matter how close your relationship is, no matter how wonderful it is. You are the mentor and not the biological parent. So I just learned to, to support the biological parent when I could, to never, never, ever trash the biological parent. That is sort of a strong rule. You never say anything negative about the biological parent. Although sometimes I did have to explain to my kids whatever was going down, not my stepkids, but my foster kids, whatever was going down, the reason their parent had missed visitation or whatever, it wasn't their issue. Didn't have to do with them. It was things that were going on with the biological parent. But I still had to learn to say that in helpful, therapeutic, um, supportive language rather than accusatory language. So in that sense, I don't switch lanes. My role is always as the mentor. And it comes up. My youngest is now an adult, and he mentions, I said something about it. Hardly ever get to see him because he's working all the time. And then one of the other brothers mentioned that he has a standing dinner date with his biological mom, and I automatically thought, wait a minute, what am I? I'm just chopped liver here. And I had to remind myself, no, I'm the mentor. I'm right where I need to be, and we have a good relationship. And let's just build on what we have, and quit making comparisons, and not let it be a contest.
Now, Debbie, I bet there were many moments that you felt like,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
you just equate to the dogs and, your lovely pet, but not really part of that family. How to
Oh
deal
yes,
with that,
Mother's Day. Yeah,
Yeah,
Mother's Day is terrible.
I can imagine. So, is there a way, a coping mechanism that you developed that helps you go through these very hurtful sometimes words, but actually you admire honesty of your children, right? You
Hmm.
cannot
Yes.
judge them by how honest their response is.
Right. Well, you learn as a lawyer, I have developed a thick skin, and that does help immensely. The other thing that I would say is develop your adult relationships. In my case, my marriage with my husband is a priority. I believe very strongly that your marriage has to take priority over your relationship with your kids for several reasons. The first one being that your kids need to see a marriage stay together, and then secondly, I've seen many of my friends blow up their marriages because of their kids, and it's not good for the kids to be the center of anyone's world. They need to not have that ego trip. But then finally, in a practical way, if I do my job, the kids will be on their own. And as someone, I wish I could remember who said this so I could give credit, but they said that if you do your job right, you will be left alone in your house with your husband and a lot of technology that your kids never remember to use to call you. And so I just long term, that relationship needs to be a priority. And then adult friendships, you need your network, and you need friends that you can vent to. In my case, I can call my brother and my sister and just vent to them, and they help put me back on track, and help me gain my perspective again,
That's
and
very
recharge my batteries. That's the other thing.
Mm, that's very interesting, Debbie, because I think many mothers struggle, especially after their biological children giving
Yeah.
birth. That is a world upside down, and all of a sudden, the kid is the center of attention. And
Yes.
that's how many marriages break down because the husband is no longer important. It's actually, somewhere between the dog and the work, right?
Right. Right. It is. It is. And I now understand, I have seen a lot of unsafe marriages that needed to break up. So when I say make your marriage a priority, I am not talking about those 5 to 10% of marriages that are actively unsafe, either emotionally or physically. But most of our marriages are just fine. they're like oh, they're like my house plants. They're a little sickly, and if I would just spend more time, they would look much better. So, and
Definitely don't make your marriage a cacti.
that's right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, cacti are the only things that I can raise because they're the only things that thrive on being neglected and then overwatered and then neglected again.
So build that resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got more questions in the stream. So let's go into another follow-up question from Olga. How do you avoid conflict where children seek to set up against a parent? So interesting to hear your wise thoughts, Debbie, on the crowded, muddy favela of parenting.
Well, I will say that kids, I just understand kids are going to set parents against each other. They do it instinctively. Sometimes they do it deliberately and consciously, but at least 60% of the time, it's just instinctive. They aren't even aware that they're doing it. Um, Kids are, they're wise beyond their years when it comes to it, exploiting weaknesses. And so that's where you just have to make sure, you just have to consciously always talk to each other, always talk to the parents, make sure that you and are on the same page. The other thing that I think as a step parent, I have to, and this was not easy for me, I have to let the biological parent in step parenting cases, I had to let my husband take the lead. And that does not come naturally to me. I am a very assertive person naturally. I'm a problem solver. I can fix problems. And I can fix problems for my kids if they'll just cooperate with me and do what I say and go along with me. I can fix problems for anyone who will let me solve their problems. So I had to affirmatively step back and realize I just have to let my husband make this decision and I have to back him on this. And fortunately, my husband and I, we worked together mostly. You know, there were some problems that we had to. Well, I inherited one of my foster kids had a bad patch, and we inherited a foster grandchild, and that grandchild was suffering from such deep levels of trauma, and we ended up, my husband and I ended up at cross purposes so often. We went into family counseling and individual counseling, and that helped immensely to have a third person explain to us what was going on with the trauma and the trauma reactions and that sort of thing. But that was a way of making sure that I was on the same page with my husband, and that we were mapping out the same strategy, and that we were committed to it and going to follow it. So with the stepkids, it was much easier. You know, our youngest child, who he was the delightful one who didn't have a filter. He's developed a filter since then, which is good for him, but more boring for me. He once said, "Oh, you know, Debbie, I had Dad pretty much where I wanted him, worn down and letting me do my own thing. And then you came along and started backing him up, and now I don't have nearly as much fun as I used to."
Mm. Now, Debbie, I wanted to go back to your statement about making your marriage the most important structure. Here is one thing that I've experienced actually with my daughter. Because I was married once, and the second marriage, we were trying very hard to deal with very difficult going into adulthood, into teenager years. And
Yes.
one thing that was a dagger to my heart was the fact that she felt she's alone. She only has a cat to pet and to confide in, because she felt like we confided against her. How
Mhm.
how do we make sure that they feel part of the family, but still keep our guard and make sure that it's a healthy family?
It is difficult, and part of it, you have to understand. Sometimes with teenagers, I've parented a lot of teenagers, and I always tell my friends, look, just you have to hang in there. At some point, the aliens will return their brains, and you just have to wait for that sometimes. So, so I don't say that to downgrade their feelings. Their feelings are very real, and you do have to deal with them. But sometimes it's just it's hormones and not logic, and so that means you can't go to what my go-to is a logical answer for kids, but logic doesn't speak to where they're coming from. So you have to be intentional about including them in family things. Not all They don't always have to come to the family things, but make sure that the three of you are doing things together. In our family, we would with the foster grandchild, we finally set up, okay, there are issues that we have to deal with and that we need to talk about, and we'll just save that till Friday. And Friday afternoon and evening was always our time to, first of all, we just hung out together. We'd have dinner, not talk about anything serious, just what went on, just and actually talk about her, and the grandchild, what was going on, and make sure that we were present and listening. And then we'd go to a movie or something interesting or something fun, and then we'd discuss if there were any issues that needed to be dealt with before we went to counseling the next week. So a lot of that was just being very intentional about making certain that there were opportunities. And given our busy schedules, Friday night just turned out to be the best for us. We'd look for other times then, but we did. It was almost like parents have a date night. I've just always found that works well with teens. When I was a single foster parent, I would, Friday afternoons was our refuge. I was through with my work. They were through with school. We would take a break. We go out to dinner with sometimes I'd go with some of my adult friends who were a good influence on her. Sometimes it was just the two of us, and make sure that there was plenty of opportunities and a set aside protected time to fit in and at least have the trappings of a family and a family discussion, family conference.
That's a good routine to have. Now we have a question from Patrick. I POV in Patrick's opinion. Fascinating discussion, Beata and Debbie. Has there been a moment, Debbie, where instead of blending the blended family, you felt more like just putting everything in a blender?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. I will say that there are many times that I felt like I was just part of that blender, and things were just out of my control. And I have joked with my husband. I grew up a fairly boring life with a functional family, and then I married into a soap opera. Um, so yes, that you just people come with their own expectations and their own understandings and their own drama. And one of the things that I have learned in dealing with that is you have to make sure the center is holding. And by that, I mean you have to make sure that your core values are in place and that your adult relationships are holding, which is another reason it's so important to concentrate on your marriage. You have to have that foundation for the family, and sometimes it may feel like that's all you have. My husband and I have a saying that we'll use to reassure each other of we're discussing some chaotic something that happens with kids who've suffered trauma, and one of us will look at the other one and say, but the center is still holding, right? And yes, as long as the center is still holding, then we can face the rest of it. And so that's I often liken it to riding a roller coaster. Sometimes if you try to steer it, you're just going to make yourself and everyone else miserable. All you can do is just make sure the safety bar is down. You concentrate on the safety bars and you wait until the ride is over.
Mm. Right, sometimes is not over, especially when you are co-parenting with those who don't want to cooperate. How do you
Yes.
deal with parents who don't want to cooperate and do everything upside down and want to be the most important part in that puzzle?
Well, the first thing you do is keep it between the adults. You try to keep the kids out of the center of it. I had a conversation with my husband once early on when I finally just said to him, just let me deal with the custody issues with your ex-wife because she doesn't make me crazy. And one of the things that he was dealing with was the kids constantly coming back late. And he said, well, I think I'm just going to call the police if they're 15 minutes late. And I said, no, you're not. That's silly. And he said, well, when can I call the police? And I said, hour and a half. And he said, why hour and a half? And I said, at an hour and a half, it's concern about the kids. Before then, it's just you arguing with your ex-wife and using the kids as a pawn. Um, did I mention our marriage is based on fairly blunt, frank opinions that are exchanged between two thick-skinned people? But my point with that was just you keep the kids out of it, and don't try to keep it from impacting the kids as much as possible. And sometimes that may involve giving in and letting kids um, letting them have more than their day of supervision or more time or whatever boundaries that you think they should be following. Your concern is the impact on the kids. Then at the other end, I remember I have had conversations, and I talk about this in my book. I have had conversations once with a biological parent who was screaming at me on the phone, and the child was sitting next to him and could hear that, and then the parent demanded to talk to their child, and I just said no, they're not available, because I could tell from the kid's face they didn't want to get involved in this. And later the parent called yelling, saying, you said he wasn't there and he was sitting there right next to you. And I said, I didn't say he wasn't there. I said he's not available. And just for future reference, anytime you're yelling at me on the phone, your child is not available. Um, and we didn't have that problem again. But so sometimes you do have to set markers and you have to set boundaries in order to protect the kids, but you always have to keep the focus on what does the child need and how can I keep this controversy from spilling over and impacting them. And if you can't, then you have talks with the kids and say, I care about you. Um, I love you. I'm here. And I think this is probably the best solution to this dilemma.
The best solution, but sometimes the best solution do not come because, for example, when the other parent hears that you have planned a Disneyland tour, they're gonna play on exactly the same weekend something better just to
Yes.
heat up the atmosphere. How do you
Yes.
deal with
Yes.
that?
Well, the time that we dealt with that, we had a trip planned, and then the other parent found out about it and gave us the notice under the court order that they were taking their vacation, their 2 weeks with the child during that exact time. And I'm a lawyer. I just looked at it and said, we'll reschedule. And part of that was, the child was very disappointed because they would rather have done what we had planned than what the biological parent had planned. But again, sometimes if you keep your rights and stake out your territory, it's going to impact the kids. So yes, we could have kept the entire family in an uproar. And if we had insisted on our vacation, nobody would have enjoyed it. So sometimes, again, sometimes you have to draw boundaries and say, because there were times when the biological parent would call and say, I've got plans to take the kid off. And I would say, no, 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 no. The court order says this, and we're sticking with that. And that was always, my guideline was, am I going to enforce the court order or not? But sometimes I just gave in gracefully and took the issue away from the toxic bio parent, and we did our thing at a different day and a different time. I would say for all of these schedule conflict issues, who's going to get the kids for Thanksgiving? Who's going to get the kids for Christmas? What are we going to do for Mother's Day or Father's Day? All of these issues, I honestly have found the best solution to them is just switch the time. We have our family get together on Christmas Eve, for example, and then the kids' mother, they spend all Christmas Day with her, and my husband and I do something else ourselves. Thanksgiving, I don't recall the last time we had a huge family get together on Thanksgiving Day. We have it after, that's an American holiday. We have it after Thanksgiving. We expand it to include a whole bunch of people who could not come if we insisted on that day. Mother's Day, Father's Day, we usually have at other times. It makes life much easier for the kids. It certainly helps build our relationship now that they're adults and can provide their own transportation. But it always just removed a source of irritation for them. And that was the whole point, is it made their lives much easier. And it was fine. Once we learned to adjust our schedules, we actually have had a lot more fun shifting the time than fighting over it.
It's so easy to nod my head now, even though at the time it was
Oh, it
so
was awful.
difficult. It's awful.
Yes, yes.
Emotions
Oh,
are in place and it's running hot. Now, since
yes,
we are
yes.
talking hot, we are going back to that comment that you made about at some time the aliens will return their brains. Perhaps the best one-liner about teenagers ever. Thank you, Debbie. Now,
Yes.
Olga Vasina is asking, how does fostering differ from becoming part of a blended family with another partner who has kids?
The main differences between fostering and a blended family is that I rarely had relationships with my foster kids' biological parents. They, I have heard of foster parents who were able to establish good relationships with biological parents. I never was. They were always on the outside, and I was always having to deal with people I didn't like and sometimes absolutely despised, but I learned to keep my opinion to myself and work on getting the kids what they wanted. The other thing that's different is foster parenting can be much more temporary. Whereas foster kids, they are going to be part of your partner's life forever, whether or not they're in your family or not, or in your home or not. They are going to be part of at least your partner's family. If they won't accept you in the family, they're at least going to be a fixture in your lives forever. So in that sense, fostering is more temporary and sometimes more difficult because you are dealing with biological parents, and you don't have a biological parent that you can partner with in the same way that you can in a blended family. At least in a blended family, there's the possibility of partnering with the biological, your partner, and getting on the same page with them, and you can set that as a goal, and you can have a healthy relationship with them. And fostering, it's a gamble as to whether you'll be able to establish that with a foster child's bio parents or not.
Mm. Now, there is an everlasting question that I've heard so many women asking when the husband or boyfriend is no longer in the picture and doesn't want to do anything with the child. Do we push for it, or do we just stay and let the time show?
You encourage, you don't push for it. You say whatever encouraging things you can to the child. You support it when you can, without raising. Sometimes it's hard to push for it or support it without raising unrealistic expectations. But you still go back to, you do not trash that parent. You just say, they've got issues going on that have nothing to do with you. Let's work on our relationship in your life, and you are wonderful. And you just let them figure out their relationship with that missing parent on their own. Sometimes they will ask you, very rarely will they ask you, but if you ever say anything negative about their parent, they certainly will not ever ask you. So the best thing to do is just be as positive as you can and still be honest with the kids. Separate the missing parents' issues from the kids' issues and the kids' responsibility, and leave it to them to figure it out on their own.
Mm. Step parents are not around to replace a biological parent, rather to augment a child's life experience, as Azriel Johnson says. Now we have another last comment for today. Olga Vasina, fabulously insightful. Thank you so much, Debbie. How have you always stayed so calm in fostering after our often challenged kids? And maybe a question about, the dirty laundry sometimes is hanging out there for the world to see because the child wants repercussions, wants you to suffer. And how do you cope with that? Do you have to have some psychological assessment, or what's it like for you?
Well, let me just say, I have not always stayed so calm. I am at the tail end of this process. Some of it is fatigue, which can look like calm, but a lot of it is just experience. I joke sometimes with my friends who come to me with problems their kids are facing, and I just say, "Oh, that doesn't crack the top 10 issues that I've faced with my kids." Um, so a lot of it is perspective, but I will say that one thing that I finally learned, and the story behind this is, I woke up one night about midnight, went to the bathroom, and on the way back, noticed that my daughter's room was empty. Went downstairs, not to looking for her, but just to get something out of the refrigerator, and saw two figures on my back porch that, suddenly broke apart. And my daughter comes into the kitchen and is saying, "Oh, I was just tired, whatever, couldn't sleep," and, obviously hiding something. And so I went out on the back porch and made myself be calm, looked over and said to this person who was hiding up against the side of my house, "Ah, you must be Michael. Why don't you come back during the day sometime so we can get acquainted?" And then I turned around, walked back inside, looked at my daughter and said, "We will talk about this tomorrow. Until then, you are grounded until you're 35." And then I went back upstairs. And I was so angry, I was beyond saying anything. when I calmed down and talked to my daughter later, she said that actually being grounded till she was 35 was reassuring because it indicated A, I was really ticked off and that was a really big deal, but B, that she would still be around until she was 35, which is a huge concern for foster kids. They always have this concern that they're going to break a rule and get bounced to the next house. Um, and so through that experience, I learned to develop a backup plan. And I used that a lot with my kids when I was so furious. And I knew I couldn't say what I wanted to say without damaging the relationship. I just learned to say, that was my go-to. It's sort of like, how the Red Cross always has a disaster plan. That was my disaster plan. I would just look at the kids and say, we'll talk about this tomorrow. And until then, you're grounded until you're 35. We'll discuss the rest of it tomorrow. And just left it there. and that always worked because it put a marker in it, let the kids know they were in trouble, let them stew a little bit. It never hurts them to stew and think about wondering how much trouble they're in. And then when I was calmer, or my husband and I both were calmer, we could talk about it better the next day. So I just encourage everyone, if having a disaster plan and just a go-to statement just helps keep you calm, because and for me, I had said something. I had something. I had a marker, and then I could go off and think about what else I wanted to say.
Well, Debbie, we've got so much to say, but as you say, Scarlett O'Hara says also in the beautiful movie Gone with the Wind, I'll think about it tomorrow. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna wrap up here before we delve too deep into this conversation, because I recommend everybody reads Debbie's book. So, Debbie's book is available now, and there will be another book coming. Talk about that. What's the title of your next book, and when is it going to be released?
My next book is Protecting Other People's Children. I'm still waiting for the book graphics. It's coming out in October, and it is more related to my legal practice. It is Protecting Other People's Children is for groups that serve young people and work with them, and it guides them through the process of setting up a child protection policy that protects the kids in their care.
Debbie, I know we've got great questions from the audience. I'm very sorry we won't be using them today. However, I wanted to ask you about your life lesson quote and how did it change you?
My life lesson quote is it's a Bible verse from John 8:32, which says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." And the reason it became my life lesson quote is because I realized there's so many things going on. I'm getting so much advice from so many people. And once I know what my core values are, and I know what is truth and the right thing to do in a situation, it is incredibly freeing to concentrate only on that and not other people's opinions or the current modes of the day or things that I've lived long enough to see truths, things that I thought were absolute truths in my 20s have vanished. But there are certain values and truths and principles that last time after time after time. And once you know those and start concentrating on those, it's incredibly freeing to be able to ignore everything else.
Now, your heart is huge, and we know that you raised your children very well, including these great books. What about your inspiration? What is the number one book you recommend everybody should read?
Actually, I recommend Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. It is a marketing book, It helped me build my practice by understanding that I'm not the hero of my story. I am the mentor or the guide that needs to be talking to my clients. I'm the lawyer who is helping them. But it also congealed for me the things that I had been feeling with my kids, which is I'm not the hero of their story. I'm not coming in telling them how wonderful they are. In my relationships, just in my personal relationships, just as in my business relationships, they are the hero of their story. And my job is to guide them on their quest to where they want to be.
Mm. Love conquers all, and truth sets you free. And there is another quotation from Tonya Crisel, former foster youth. You might be temporary in their lives. They may be temporary in yours, but there is nothing temporary about the love for the lesson. That's a lesson to learn from today's discussion. And finally, let's imagine that you could meet anyone in the world to have a private breakfast anywhere in the world. Who would you choose and where would you go to, Debbie?
Well, I'm showing my age here, but the one famous person that I've always wanted to meet and never have is Condoleezza Rice, because aside, I know that many people think of her in political terms, but I think of her as someone who had a front row seat to so many life changing events, from growing up in the segregated South to watching the civil rights movement smash all the barriers, and her ability to get past those barriers, and then a front row seat to the fall of communism and the Soviet Union. I would just like to know the stories behind all of those world changing, earth shattering events. And when I've heard her speak, I've always been impressed with, even if I agreed more with the person she was debating, I've always been impressed with her ability to show respect and concern and listen to other sides. And I think it would just be a fascinating intellectual feast of a conversation with her. And we would do it in her home in Southern California, because Southern
Why not?
California. How can you pass up Southern California?
Absolutely. Would your foster children be with you, and children and grandchildren?
As many of them as I could get to come listen to the conversation, yes.
Oh my goodness. Debbie, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. And your words of wisdom really inspire future generations. And that's it from episode 146 of PhD Livestream. Thanks to our guest, Debbie Ausburn. To stay updated and never miss a PhD, follow Woman on It and turn on notifications to be alerted once a video has been released. Next week, we gonna have guest Elizabeth Naumowski. Please join us at 6 p.m. CET, 12 p.m. EST. And thank you so much for great questions, Patrick and Olga. As always, our positivity quote comes from Positive Thinking Only and goes, look for something positive in each day, even if some days you have to look a little harder. And finally, Maya Angelou quotation. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude, which applies to so many families wide and near. And thank you very much for a great team today who should be celebrating Independence Day, but they joined us today. Racy, Fernando, and Jamil, lovely to have you all. Speak to you soon. That's it from this opportunity to hug the future, hug the positivity you want. Thank you.